Hey, Dave Paulides, Canada Missing Project, a copyrighted version for our YouTube page. Hey, first of all, thanks for tuning in. It's another week, kind of radical weather up here. We've had some thunderstorms, and you might see some nasty clouds in the background. But in this version, we're going to talk about the Cascades, starting in Northern California, going up through British Columbia. And for people who haven't read the books, there's a lot of people missing in the Cascades. Too many to ignore. And it's part of the Pacific Mountain System. It has some extinct volcanoes in it and some active ones. And up in Northern California, I've written about cases at Mount Lassen and also Mount Shasta. Now, if you go back into one of our high 40s videos, I think we're approaching 50 now on this channel. But in one of them, I spoke about a man that disappeared on Mount Shasta named Carl Landers. And if you go onto Amazon.com, you can watch a show I made for the History Channel called Vanished, where he's highlighted there. But that's only Mount Shasta. There was also a case I wrote about on Mount Lassen. And this range of the Cascades extends 700 miles north. Some of the cases I've written about in Oregon were in the Mount Jefferson and the Sisters Wilderness on North Sister, also in Mount Hood in Oregon. And then as you go further north, you got Mount Rainier at over 14,000 feet. Also, there's a bunch of cases on Mount Rainier. There's also a couple of cases I've written about on Mount St. Helens at a little over 9,600 feet before it blew its top. And probably one of the more interesting mountains in the Cascades in Washington is Mount Adams. And if you go online, there's a long history of strange lights coming out of that mountain. And very unusual is that there's almost hardly any missing people around that mountain. Don't know what to say about that. But for being a big mountain at 12,200, you'd think there would be, but there's none. Kind of strange. But in the Cascades system, going from Northern California to BC, and I won't talk about Canada here, but there's almost 60 people I've written about. That's a lot. And when you think about the volcanoes, active and inactive, then you also talk about all of these are high mountains, 9, 10, 11, 12, up to 14,000 feet. Lots of granite. Lots of water. There's lakes all around these places. And there's an isolation factor. Now, Carl Landers, talking about Mount Shasta, disappeared on May 25th, 1999. He's 69 years old. I won't go into the details. You can go back in the videos and watch. But there was also another man that disappeared on Mount Shasta. His name was John Neza. He was 80 years old. He disappeared July 17th, 1965. John was not your average man, by any means. He had summited Mount Shasta 40 times. And people had seen him on the mountain that day, so they knew that he was there when he disappeared. But as I've stated in every interview I've ever done on Shasta, there's no place to disappear there. There are no crevices. And in speaking to the searchers that ran the operation on Carl Landers, there's no place really to hide there. The idea that two men, elderly men, vanished on that mountain is truly bizarre. Talk about another case. Ron Ohm, August 9th, 2012. He was on the shadow of Mount Jefferson up in Oregon. And he was with two other friends. And they were backpacking in. Ron had a full backpack full of stuff. And as they were dropping into Russell Lake, John said he was going to stay behind and take some pictures on a ridge that overlooked the lake. You could see the lake. It was in the shadow of Jefferson. And he was going to stay behind, and he'd meet up with him not too long after that. But that night, he didn't show up. And his friends hiked out the next day, notified U.S. Forest Service. They notified the county sheriff, and a massive search started. It was found that Ron had a medical condition. And it was never clear what that condition was, but he had to take medication every day. The sheriff also made it absolutely clear that the location that Ron was in complete view of the lake where his friends were backpacking. There could be no mistake, and the trail was obvious. So you've got granite, water, cluster, because there's a cluster of missing people there, and a medical condition. And he was a photographer. Why do I bring up the point about the photographer? Unusually, there's too many stories I've written about where somebody was designated a photographer for whatever reason and vanished. And the next story, the person was a photographer. Mount St. Helens. It was on May 21st, 1950, and a man named Joe Carter, 32 years old. He was with 20 other friends, and they were climbing Mount St. Helens at a little over 9,000 feet then. Joe was a brilliant man. He worked at Boeing, and on his weekends, he was a national ski patrolman at a local ski resort. He was an expert skier, and he was in outstanding shape. So his friends, they climbed the mountain, and Joe said he was going to, and all of his friends brought their skis because they were going to ski down. So Joe tells his friends, hey, you guys wait here. I'm going to go down the mountain, make a little turn down here. I'll set up and photograph you guys as you're going by. He said, great. So Joe took off. Friends gave him some time. They skied down, and they saw some packaging material from his camera film that he was using. But they didn't see him. And they went down to the bottom of the mountain, looked around, didn't see him, called the sheriff. The sheriff came in. This is one of the weirdest cases I've ever written about. And I've written about many weird cases. But the search and rescue quoted this statement. He made a wild, death-defying dash down the mountain. He jumped over 3 crevices, and he skied straight off a ledge into nothingness into a canyon. And there was a lot of things written about this that weren't true. And namely that there were things seen on the mountain. There weren't. Search and rescue didn't find any tracks in the snow other than his. There was a lot of things about it that didn't make any sense at all because he was such a stable individual. So you have to ask yourself, what would make Joe Carter ski like a madman, like he's racing away from something down a mountain, and then ski directly off a ledge to your death? They did a massive search of that valley below where Joe disappeared. He was never found. They didn't find any of his equipment in the valley either, which was weird. But there's 3 cases for you from the Cascades. Neza, never found. Ohm, never found. Carter, never found. Now there's some people in this world that, again, know nothing about my work and like to slam it. There's a couple people that have said, well, there's nothing unusual about the cases David writes about. Holy crap. Okay, those are just normal. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Especially with the effort that search and rescues put into all of these. They don't do it for their health. They're doing it trying to save lives and give the family some closures. Now, let's go to the mailbag. I did get an interesting email this week, and it's from a Native American lady. I'm not sure if this letter will contain anything you would find necessary to read your show, but if so, I request that you leave my name out of it. I just turned 32 and I'm a two-spirit person, similar to shamans of the blank nation. She asked me to leave their nation out of it. I've been a fan of your work for years, and I was overjoyed to find your channel on YouTube. I've always felt respect toward you, not just for your character and compassionate efforts, but your openness with Indigenous people, listening respectfully to our perspectives. This may seem like common sense to you, but we are often laughed at or disregarded. So I don't often want to speak of this, speak to others about what I know. This will be a long message, but I hope you have time someday to look at it. I cut a long backstory short. I was homeless for a short period of time in California and lived in the Mount Shasta region. For this reason, I want to talk about the mountain quickly. The mountain is a hotspot. I've learned from a lot of the Wintu people, and I wish visitors to the mountain would listen to what they say, because this mountain is incredibly dangerous. It is a powerful place that the Wintu don't even bring children up to, Panther Meadows, because it is so thick with the spirit world. They beg people not to go beyond the tree line and into the boulders. This may never come back. People will go to the Sacred Meadows spring, which bubbles up from the ground like a miracle, and ignorantly throw crystals, coins, and stones into it to make a wish. This itself is one of the most dangerous things you could do on Shasta. People will go up to the meadows and dump ashes, which astonishes the tribe. It's like dumping a loved one's soul into a vortex that will never know peace. And if the spring gets clogged up with trinkets and hippie crystals, it would be very bad for the whole mountain and end up being an even more dangerous and volatile place. My heart goes out to the Wintu who have routinely put their hands into this delicate spring to sift out the obstructions and keep things out. If you go there, do not go past the tree line and attempt to summit the mountain. Do not bring anything, take anything, or leave anything behind. Do not bring your children to the meadows. I do not think it's safe for children to be any higher than Bunny Flats. I wish the forestry people would respect the tribe's wishes for certain areas to be closed off, or at least educate people of traditional warnings. When we did the research for Vanished on this Mount Shasta, Harvey Pratt was one of the people that we worked with on this segment. And there's powerful medicine, according to many Native Americans, about Mount Shasta. And certain portions of the mountain are cordoned off that you just don't go there. And I believe this kind of stuff. These people have it for a reason. And many of the mountains in the Cascades have this sort of mystical feeling about it, and the Native Americans or First Nations in Canada also have those beliefs about this. Next story. Dear David, thank you so much for what you're doing and for the missing. I live in Australia, and I believe you may have saved my 10-year-old daughter because you spoke about a walking trail called Lily Pilly Trail in Victoria. My daughter was on a school camp, and after listening to you, I believe if I hadn't told her not to go down that trail, that she had to stay in the back with a teacher, and around the same time someone went missing not long after she was there. And that person was found, but I just wanted to say thanks for what you're doing. You're an outstanding person. Thanks. Thanks for that. You know, it makes me feel good that someone's paying attention. And sometimes you think there's no one really listening, but in that instance, you touched my heart. Thanks. And I know I talk about missing people and trail safety, etc., but every once in a while you do something and you're not quite sure if there's a broader reach to the topic. And this next note, I hit that broader reach, and it was important to me. My name's Matt, I won't say his last name. I'm a 41-year-old married to a beautiful young caring wife and a father of 4 awesome sons. I'm a building principal in blah blah, New York, and I wanted to write to say thank you for all you do, but I want to share something with you that I feel is important. I've been in education for 15 years and a classroom teacher and an athletic director. I love education for so many reasons, but primarily I love the fact that each and every day is an opportunity to help others. For the last 3 years or so, I've utilized you as a positive example to students, colleagues, and families. Allow me to explain. As an educator, we often get questions from students about life after school. Many students become pensive when thinking about the hypothetical scenarios regarding a career. I've always had the mindset inherited from my mother and father that if you work at doing something you love or are passionate about that, and it doesn't seem to work, then this seems to work. Hold on. That if you work at doing something you love or are passionate about, then it doesn't seem like work at all. This is often stated, and I'm sure you know, but trying to find an example to share with students on the outside myself can be challenging. After reading your books and watching your movies about missing 411, it's clear as day to me that you are passionate about what you do. With that said, when I have these conversations with students, I ask them if they have ever heard of your name. Thus far, all the answers have been no. Oh well. But that's the answer I'm looking for. One thing I've learned about the young people, they can sense the difference between adults who are authentic and care about who they are, and what they do from those who carry out their day-to-day in a fraudulent manner. So I ask the student if they have ever heard of you. I get a no and then proceed to fill them in on your background. Then I instruct them to watch some of your videos from either Missing 411 or the Can-Am channel. The kids can see your passion and your sincerity every time. I know this because when you come back with lots of questions, they always do. When you are and what you have, who you are and what you have done and continue to work towards has been one of your greatest teaching tools, and I've utilized over the years. Several students, after taking in some of your work, I've come back and said they were interested in either law enforcement, forensics, outdoor conservation, such as DEC in New York State, writing, podcasting, blogging, and search and rescue. The other way I utilize you is by showcasing the approach you take when asking people to be courteous and respectful in their comments and tweets. Social media issues are an ongoing crisis of sorts in education. When we have adults who in this day and age where everything has become criticized, also engage in childish, inappropriate commentary instead of civilized discussions, it's upsetting, unnecessary, and disappointing. The fact that you are consistent and open about being considerate in the way people are communicating with one another is great. It goes on. I won't read the whole thing, but I do want to say that sometimes just doing the simple things, like making sure that you are not subject to ridicule, abuse, and harsh comments online. It's a small thing I can do, but it's big in this world, and it made an impression on this person. And hopefully I can make an impression on more people. It's not hard to be nice. And the people out there that are doing these mean things, we just have to ignore them. And I have to say, thank you very much for your continued support, and I will continue to be an advocate for you and for the missing people in this world. And I do have deep compassion for what the families go through, and I hope you do as well. Continue to pass our word around as summer approaches. We need the people in this world that go out and enjoy the great outdoors to go out and enjoy them safely with a personal locator beacon and with a friend. So, share this on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and thanks for being my friend.